Today, we return to a frozen corner of rural Germany in 1922, where 6 souls vanished not into thin air, but into silence. No cries, no witnesses, just blood in the hay, footsteps in the snow, and a farmhouse that kept breathing after its family stopped. Some say it was madness. Others whisper of obsession, revenge, or something far darker. But one thing is certain, the killer stayed. So lean in as we enter the haunting enigma of the Hinterkaifeck murders. There were footsteps in the snow. That's how it begins. A lonely trail stretching from the dense Bavarian woods to the isolated farmhouse at Hinterkaifeck. Deep, deliberate, and one way. No footsteps ever left. Inside, 6 bodies lay scattered like discarded puppets. Andreas Gruber, the patriarch, his skull cleaved open as if someone were trying to excavate his thoughts. His wife, Kazilia, jaws shattered, hands mangled from fighting something no human should face. Their daughter, Victoria, buried beneath hay in the barn, her throat crushed. Her children, one suffocated, the other bludgeoned, face unrecognizable. Even the maid, Maria Baumgartner, newly hired and already doomed, was found inside, her body carefully covered like a gift no one wanted. But here's what you won't read in the police reports. The killer had stayed, fed the cattle, ate meals, stoked the fire, slept in the beds. Someone lived among the dead in silence for days, like death was an act of vacation. There are no security cameras, no cell phone pings, just blood in the hay. Screams swallowed by distance, an eerie click of boots in snow that never turned back. This is the Hinterkaifeck case, Germany's most brutal unsolved family murder. And everything about it feels wrong. Not just evil, wrong. Like a dream stitched together by a mind unraveling. Like someone was watching for years. Bavaria, 1922. Picture like a grim fairy tale. Stripped of whimsy and left to rot. Hinterkaifeck wasn't even a real village, just a nickname for an isolated farmstead tucked between Ingolstadt and Schrobenhausen. You had to hike half a mile through woods just to see another soul. Think isolation. Then double it, now buried in snow and silence. Germany, post-World War I, was teetering on a knife's edge. The Weimar Republic was bleeding out economically. Inflation was so monstrous you could wallpaper your house with worthless banknotes and still not make rent. Soldiers came home to broken homes, broken dreams, and ideologies fighting like starving wolves in the street. Paranoia wasn't just in fashion, it was survival. And in the countryside, time didn't pass. It fermented. Old customs clung like mildew. Superstition wasn't folklore, it was policy. People whispered of ghosts, witches, forest spirits, and the devil himself. Everyone knew someone who'd seen something in the woods. The line between real and imagined wasn't just blurred. It was erased with a blood-stained thumbprint. In this world lived the Grubers. Or maybe endured is the better word. Their farm stood like a stubborn tooth in the jaw of the wilderness. Sturdy, secretive, and just far enough from help to make sure it would never come in time. By day, they toiled under grim skies. By night, they were shadows in shuttered windows, a family alone with its routines, and secrets, and something else, something scratching at the walls. Literally, a few weeks before the murders, Andreas Gruber began telling neighbors strange things. Footsteps in the attic, keys going missing, a newspaper appearing that no one remembered buying. He said it felt like someone was in the house, living with them. Everyone laughed. No one's laughing now. Andreas Gruber was not the kind of man you'd mourn. Let's be clear. He was cruel, paranoid, and reportedly abusive to his animals, to his neighbors, to his own daughter. He ruled the farm like a petty tyrant, and he wore his hatred like a second skin. Think of him as a walking thundercloud, always ready to strike, never bothered by who got burned. His wife, Kazilia, kept to herself, the way someone does when life offers no escape but silence. Their daughter, Victoria, though Victoria was different. A church singer, a widow, a mother of 2. She was beautiful, magnetic, and somehow still standing after everything life had thrown at her. People whispered her name with reverence and suspicion, because Victoria had secrets, and not the kind you can bury forever. For years, She had reportedly been in an incestuous relationship with her father. It's the kind of horror no one wants to believe, but several testimonies and a jail sentence suggest it wasn't rumor. Andreas was convicted once before for immorality, though the details were quickly smothered under shame and denial. Victoria had tried to break away. She'd sought affection elsewhere. But men who get drunk on control don't let go. They destroy. Then there were the children, little Casilia, age 7, and Joseph, barely 2. No one really knew who Joseph's father was. Some said a dead soldier. Others whispered something darker, that he was Andreas' son and grandson. Victoria had claimed the baby was fathered by a local man named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a former lover, once desperate to marry her. But Lorenz denied paternity and paid nothing. The court records are a maze of accusation and denial, and the truth is a corpse lost in the fog. And yet, through all this, the Grubers went on. They milked the cows, tilled the soil, attended church, waved to neighbors with hands that hid more than dirt. You could say they were cursed. But sometimes, curses are just people doing monstrous things to one another behind closed doors. Sometimes the monster is the patriarch, and sometimes the people closest to him just try to survive until someone decides, enough. It began with a maid quitting. That's how this avalanche of horror was first hinted at. A domestic worker, too frightened to sleep under the same roof as the Grubers, packing her bags and vanishing into town. She claimed the house was haunted, that she heard voices in the attic, scratching, breathing, noises that didn't belong to animals or humans. The kind that only made sense if you accepted the one explanation no one dared speak aloud. Someone was already inside the house, and no one believed her. Andreas, predictably, scoffed. Victoria was used to fear what was one more layer. Casilia said nothing, because that's what women like her did. And the children? They just kept playing, laughing, dreaming, until the dreams ended in blood. It happened between March 31st and April 1st, 1922, a Friday just before the Sabbath. Victoria and her daughter Casilia were likely lured into the barn first, perhaps by sounds or movement or some strange compulsion. They were bludgeoned with a mattock, a horrifying tool that looks like someone gave a pickaxe anxiety. Their skulls shattered, their faces obliterated, their fear fossilized in the dirt. Then came Andreas and his wife Casilia, drawn into the same death trap, killed the same way. Each body carefully stacked atop the last, hay strewn over the mound like an afterthought or a mockery of modesty. Inside the house, little Joseph lay in his cot in the mother's bedroom, crushed by the same hand. His tiny body was covered by one of Victoria's dresses. The new maid, Maria Baumgartner, her bag still unpacked, met the same end. She never made it past the threshold of her new life. 6 people, 4 adults, 2 children, all murdered with brutal precision. No one heard a thing. No screams, no cries for help, just silence, just a cold, biting wind winding through the trees, like it knew what happened and chose not to speak. And then the killer stayed, fed the animals, ate their food, slept in their beds, even milked the cows, because this wasn't a murder of rage. This wasn't quick or sloppy. This was ritual, patience, hate that had fermented until it curdled into something nearly supernatural. Whoever did this didn't just want to kill the Grubers. They wanted to erase them. Days passed, literal days, and no one noticed. That's what makes this case feel like a hallucination with a body count. Mail piled up. Little Casilia missed school. No one saw the family at church. The house sat there, mute, brooding, and wrong, like a painting that suddenly grew eyes. And yet, in that silence, smoke still puffed from the chimney. Someone was inside. It took 4 days before neighbors finally checked on the Grubers. When they entered the barn, what they found didn't feel like murder. It felt like desecration. The air was heavy, not just with decay, but with the unspoken sense that whoever had done this had watched the bodies rot, maybe even enjoyed it. The barn was staged. That's the word police used. Bodies stacked, not dumped, tools oddly placed, a discarded pipe, a hidden key, like someone had choreographed a crime scene for an audience that would never arrive. Then there was the kitchen. Food had been eaten, bread cut, meat missing. Someone had even gone upstairs and slept in the beds. The killer didn't flee. They nested. Now here's where it gets worse. Because of course it does. Investigators found clear signs that someone had been living in the attic. The very attic the maid once fled in terror from. Footprints in the dust. A strange hole in the wall, carved out like a peephole, positioned directly above Victoria's room. That's right. Someone may have been watching this family for weeks, listening to them, breathing just above them while they slept, observing every movement, every private moment, all while sharpening a mattock and waiting. And you know what they found in the barn? Hair. Long strands of hair clutched in little Cazilia's hand. She was alive after the first blow. Not for long, but long enough to rip hair from her killer's head in agony. She knew who it was, and now we never will. The police were baffled. Too many questions, too few answers. The investigation crawled, and while Bavaria reeled in horror, the killer vanished, without a single footprint leading away from Hinterkaifeck, because maybe they never left. Or maybe they were never supposed to. You'd think the slaughter of an entire family, 2 children included, would ignite a surgical, relentless manhunt. But this was 1922 rural Germany, where police work was still part guesswork, part divine intervention, and entirely overwhelmed by superstition and scandal. Dozens of officers scoured the farm, but the site was already trampled by neighbors, by investigators, by the morbidly curious. The crime scene was treated like a museum exhibit for the damned. People touched everything, moved things. One officer pocketed part of skull for reference. Another smoked a pipe beside the corpses. It was like watching a clown car at a funeral. So the investigators turned to theories. And no, the theories came like a flood of bad dreams. Theory 1, robbery. Except nothing was stolen. Money was found in drawers. Jewelry untouched. Even a sizable stash of coins sat in plain view. Either this was the most absent-minded thief in German history, or robbery was a red herring so obvious it glittered. Theory 2, a vagrant, a madman, the kind of killer who lives in the woods and feeds on nightmares. Maybe, but this murder wasn't wild. It was meticulous, precise. You don't slaughter a family one by one in silence without a plan. This wasn't random. This was personal. Theory 3, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Yes, the ex-lover. The maybe father of Joseph. The neighbor who, brace yourself, was the first to discover the bodies. He climbed through the window to open the locked house from the inside. Some say he seemed too calm. Others pointed out he knew exactly where to walk in the barn. He even touched the corpses without flinching. Then there's this. Days before the murders, Lorenz had a public argument with Andreas about child support. He hated Andreas, and he was obsessed with Victoria. She'd rejected him, and he wanted her back, badly enough to burn the world around her. Maybe, but Lorenz was questioned, again and again, and nothing stuck. No evidence, no confession, just unease. Then came the stranger accounts. Locals said they saw shadows in the woods, heard chanting. One man claimed he saw a figure lurking near the barn after the bodies were found, just watching. And the most grotesque theory? The incestuous father, Andreas, did it all in a fit of rage, murdered his family, then himself. Except the blows to his head couldn't have been self-inflicted unless he had arms like a trebuchet. So investigators kept chasing ghosts, chasing whispers, chasing nothing. Because the truth of Hinterkaifeck wasn't just hidden, it was devoured. If the Hinterkaifeck case had a breaking point, a moment where horror spilled into absurdity, it was the autopsies, conducted not in a hospital, not in a morgue, but on a wooden table in the barn, next to the body's final resting place. A local doctor stood under flickering lantern light and decapitated all 6 victims for examination. The heads were boxed up and sent to Munich for psychic evaluation. You heard that right. Psychic evaluation. In one of the most baffling investigative decisions in German criminal history, the authorities consulted clairvoyants, hoping supernatural insight might crack the case where logic had failed. Spoiler alert, it didn't help. The psychics saw dark forces, One blamed earth spirits. Another claimed the house was cursed by grief turned demonic. Not one of them saw a name. And then something even worse happened. The heads went missing, lost during wartime transport in World War II, destroyed, misplaced, or swallowed by bureaucracy and bombs. No one knows. All that remains of the victims are incomplete bodies, buried without faces, without closure, without identity. It's almost too perfect, as if the case itself wanted to disappear. Meanwhile, the town turned inward. Distrust curdled into accusation. Families shunned each other. Children whispered legends about the butcher Kaifeck lurking in the woods. Cows stopped producing milk. Crops failed. People left. Even the house. The physical structure was abandoned, stripped for parts, and finally burned to ground in 1923. No one wanted to live on that land. Would you? And yet, despite the dead ends, the dozens of suspects, and the endless rumors, one detail never faded. The footsteps. Those silent tracks in the snow that came from the forest, entered the farm and never returned. That wasn't just logistics. That was psychology. Someone came there with full intention. They didn't flee because they weren't scared. They didn't panic because they didn't regret. The killer stayed, like it was home. Resolution? No. What we have are theories stitched together with cobwebs and desperation. What we have are contradictions thick enough to drown in. What we have is a mystery that refused to behave. There was no conviction, no arrest, no justice. The case was reopened in 1996. That's not a typo. 1996, 74 years after the murders. A group of German criminology students, backed by their professor, tried to re-examine the evidence with modern methods. Psychological profiling, victimology, forensics. They pored over surviving police reports, crime scene photos, and witness accounts warped by time and trauma. They reconstructed the personalities, the timelines, the geography of the crime. They mapped motive, opportunity, pathology, and then they landed on a name, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Again, they argued that his behavior was too suspicious, that his presence at the crime scene, his quick access to the bodies, his unbothered demeanor, all pointed to premeditation. They said the locked doors, the covered corpses, the milking of the cows, none of it felt like the work of an outsider. But here's the thing, that name was never officially published, not in full, out of respect for surviving relatives. Respect, as if this case ever had any. So the official stance remains unsolved, technically still open, no legal resolution, no formal accusation, just 6 people buried in silence and dirt, and one house that tried to keep its secrets under lock, key, and blood. And the questions won't stop coming. Why were the bodies stacked with such eerie precision? Why were the family animals cared for, fed, protected, while the humans were left to rot? Why was the baby covered in Victoria's dress? Why did no one hear anything? Who needed to watch from the attic? And worst of all, why did the killer stay? Because if this wasn't random, and it wasn't rage, and it wasn't greed, then maybe it was love twisted so far into madness it snapped. Or maybe it was something older, something colder. The land, the house, the sins passed down through generations. And maybe, just maybe, that house didn't need a killer to attract evil. It just was evil. The land where Hinterkaifeck once stood is still there. No structures remain, just grass and wind, and a thick silence that doesn't move quite right. Locals avoid it. Children are warned not to play there. Some say you can still hear creaking above, as if someone's pacing an attic that no longer exists. In the decades since the massacre, the case has transcended crime. It's become folklore, a German ghost story whispered under breath, the kind of tale that slips from fact into feeling, and from feeling into nightmare. And yet, there are facts, legacies, reverberations. The Gruber family's murder exposed the staggering incompetence of early 20th century rural policing. It accelerated discussions around centralized criminal databases in Bavaria. It became one of the first modern examples used in German criminology courses to highlight scene contamination and the psychological profiling of killers who linger. But that's the academic layer. The emotional layer is far worse. This wasn't just a family dying. This was a town imploding. Neighbors turned on each other. Gossip metastasized into accusations. Entire families fell under suspicion. Generations marked by whispers and side glances. Wasn't your grandfather near the Gruber farm that week? Didn't your aunt date Lorenz Schlittenbauer? Weren't you related to Victoria? Some surviving relatives changed their names, moved away, pretended the farm never existed. But memory has claws. In 2007, a local historian tried to mount a formal memorial at the Hinterkaifeck site. He wanted a plaque, just a stone with names. But the backlash was swift. Locals argued it would bring darkness back. Some even threatened to destroy it. The project was abandoned, not because they didn't care, because they still do. Because Hinterkaifeck is a wound that never scarred. It still pulses beneath the layers of grass and shame and lost time. It reminds us that some stories don't end. They just rot quietly, waiting to be remembered again. They found a newspaper in the house, dated after the murders, folded, read, left on the table. Someone sat in that farmhouse, alone, surrounded by corpses, with blood in the floorboards and rot in the air, and read the news. Think about that. What kind of person does that? Not someone in a frenzy, not someone panicked. Someone comfortable. Someone who felt entitled to be there. Someone who didn't just kill, they replaced. Maybe that's the worst part of Hinterkaifeck. Not just the violence, not even the secrecy, but the psychology of occupation. The slow horror of someone deciding that this wasn't a crime scene. It was home now. The case leaves you with no closure, no catharsis, no punishment, just a hole shaped like 6 people, and a whisper that keeps getting louder the longer you sit in silence. Someone watched them die, not once, not in a flash, but slowly, deliberately, across days, and then vanished into history's blind spot. But maybe the killer never truly vanished, because you don't forget Hinterkaifeck. You don't walk away from it unchanged. It stays with you, in the creak of your attic floor, in the tapping of a pipe, in the moment you think you're alone but something shifts above you. Not everything in the dark wants to kill you. Some things just want to watch. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next case.